So welcome everyone to this webinar about how you can build an NLP chatbot for customer support automation. This is actually a webinar that we have done in the past, um, but across different webinars. We've done all of the components that we're going to talk about in this webinar before, but in separate sessions. And what we decided to do was we decided to pull out all of those individual components from other webinars and put them together into one package to talk about NLP chatbots in the context of customer support automation. Now, as always, in these webinars, we like to begin with intros, just to tell you who we are, just to tell you who I am as your host, and just so that you know where the information on this webinar is coming from. I'm Arnav, your regular host for these webinars. I'm a content marketer over here at TARS, and what that means is that I create content just like this webinar to help you guys get the most out of your marketing campaigns, out of your customer support operations. I think we have someone chatting. Hi, Pierre. Welcome to the webinar. It's great to have you on. We're just getting started right now, so you haven't really missed much. Just missed my intro, really, and my attempt to drink this atrocious coffee that I made right before the webinar. Let's continue. Okay, so who are we at TARS? At TARS, we have we have been around since 2016, helping businesses boost their conversion rate using conversational tech. Now, that's just the elevator pitch definition. We've actually expanded our scope, and what underlies this mission, what underlies this sort of pitch over here, is a broader vision to improve the way that businesses interact with their customers. So that means whether you are in a customer support context, whether you are in a marketing context, your customers have questions for you. They want to talk to you. They want to share information with you. They want to get information with you. What's the best way to facilitate that trade of information? And the answer is that we have found is conversations. And the way we operationalize that, the way we help businesses do it at scale, is using automated conversational tech or chatbots, which is what we are talking about today. And it's that vision that we've been working towards that is informing what we talk about on the webinar today, to give you the information that we are going to give you today. I do see we have a message in the chat about someone asking about YouTube Live. Unfortunately, since I am on a new machine and it requires verification, I cannot log into the appropriate YouTube Live account. So we will not be doing YouTube Live today, but we will upload this webinar onto YouTube as soon as it is done. Now, it's also brought my attention to the fact that we've got a bunch more attendees join us since I started the webinar. Welcome, guys. We're just starting out and we just finished the intros. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're going to discuss today on the webinar, and then actually get into it, because there's a lot to cover, as you can see from this slide. Usually in these table of contents slides, we only have maybe 3 or 4 points, but today we have 6. That's how you know that this webinar is going to be packed with information. So now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, there are several different components at play in the topic that we are discussing today. First, we are talking about how you can use chatbots for customer support automation. So we need to sort of justify why chatbots make sense for customer support automation, which is what we're going to talk about in sections 1 and 2. We're going to breeze through that really quickly because I think we're all on the same page about this, but I figured it doesn't hurt to reaffirm that we are all on the same page. Then the second component that we need to talk about today is NLP chatbots, because not only are we talking about how you can create chatbots to address your customer support issues and to automate customer support query resolution, we're talking about how NLP chatbots in particular are equipped to do that. So in section 3, we are going to add a complication to the stuff that we talked about in sections 1 and 2 by bringing in the NLP angle to this whole discussion. Then finally, in sections 4 and 5, we are actually going to take a look at what that looks like in practice. So how it actually works to implement NLP chatbots in your customer support operation, what the basic mechanisms at play are, and we'll actually even take a look at an example that's live that's deployed out there that you can go interact with today to see what it looks like. And then finally, we will end with a Q&A. We'll end with a Q&A where you guys have access to me and can ask me any questions that you have about chatbots, customer support automation, marketing, pretty much anything that you guys want. But without further ado, let's get started with the actual content of the webinar, the important stuff, the issues with traditional customer support. So why are we talking about using chatbots? Why are we talking about using chatbots to address customer support queries? And a good starting point for this is to look at how we traditionally address customer support queries. And broadly speaking, there are two ways that we do this. Hold on just a second. Getting some errors over here. Okay. We're back in business. Okay. So generally speaking, there are two ways that we address customer support issues at our businesses. There are human-based systems and there are text-based systems. Let's break down what each one of these looks like so we understand where chatbots figure into the broader customer support context. Now, starting with human-based systems, there are obviously great things about using human agents to address customer support queries. In a lot of ways, human beings are the gold standard for customer support because human beings can deliver a highly personalized, engaging experience when you're talking to someone. They can adjust the way they're talking to you. They can adjust what they say to you, the sort of tone that they use to what you prefer from hearing you. We are able to empathize with other people. We're able to use that to talk to people. And second, we're able to address highly complex issues. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've been stuck on a phone call tree and tried to hit zero so that I could get to a human being, because it's very easy for me to explain the issue I'm facing to another person. And I feel a sense of assurance that the person on the other end is going to understand that issue and either be able to resolve it or know who to go to or where to direct me to get my issue resolved. And I'm sure you guys have all had experiences like this as well. So in many ways, human agents are great. Human-based customer support is great, but it's not all great. There are some issues with it. And primarily it boils down to cost, because while human beings are great at addressing issues, they're also quite expensive. Managing the payroll, HR, office space required to host a human customer support team is expensive for most businesses, regardless of what size you are really. Big businesses struggle with this, enterprises struggle with this, small businesses struggle with this as well. There are intangible costs associated with running an agent-based customer support operation. Stress, free time, mental well-being, sort of all goes out of the window because you're managing an entire other team to handle these things for you. And the end result of both of these things is that you inevitably have fewer agents than you need to address all of your queries at peak times, and your wait times start to increase, which is not fun for the customer. It's not fun for your business either, because it affects your customer satisfaction. It affects your ability to actually respond to queries. And then there is the ugly with human-based customer support. Things happen. And they can disrupt your human-based customer support systems. We've had customers who've had their call centers go down because of hurricanes. We've had customers whose call centers have gone down because of power cuts. The pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had a lot of customer conversations where people were having trouble transitioning their agents over to remote work, and it caused a lot of friction for their customers, especially at a time when people had a lot of questions because people wanted to know how the pandemic was going to affect their service, or want to know how the pandemic was going to affect delivery of products. So there's quite a bit wrong with human-based customer support systems. And that's where text-based customer support comes into the picture. And when I'm talking about text-based customer support, I'm talking about things like help docs, FAQs, where you put all of the information that a human being would otherwise give you over a live chat or a phone call on to the internet as a web page or as documentation. And text-based customer support systems are great because they address all of the issues of human-based customer support systems. They're cheap. They require no effort after you set them up. You put up the web page with the information on it, and then you don't have to touch it. You can just direct customers to that web page, and then they can figure their way around to answer the queries that they have. And of course, they are always available. Text-based systems don't really go down unless your server goes down, which is quite rare. And they're always going to be available, regardless of what time of day it is, regardless of what day of the year it is. It can be Christmas and your web page is still up. Your web page doesn't need to take a holiday. The issue, though, is that it sort of the inverse of human-based systems. They're unengaging. People don't like reading through walls of text. They don't like reading through pages of text. They can barely make it through a Facebook post, let alone a long help doc or an FAQ page. And there's no ugly over here. We couldn't continue the metaphor because, well, I would say that the boring part was pretty bad. Some metaphors just don't work out. But the end result of both of these approaches is that as customer support folks, as business folk, we are asked to choose between two imperfect solutions for resolving customer support queries. We can choose the effective but expensive and disruptible human-based approach on one side, or we can choose the ineffective but cheap and reliable text-based approach on the other side. And this is a real dilemma because you obviously don't want to choose just either one of them. So the end result is that most people choose both. Most people have resources online and they have a live chat system or a call center system. And they figure at least the good things about each will cancel the bad things of the other out. But usually what happens is that you get the worst of both worlds. See, people go to your online resources. They can't decipher what's there in the text. They don't want to decipher what's there, so they give your call center a call. They go onto your live chat, and then they end up stuck in line waiting for an agent to get to get free. But that's why we're here on this webinar today. That's where chatbots come into the picture. And when we're talking about chatbots, so we're on the same page, you can think of a chatbot like an automated customer service rep that can answer questions that a prospect might have, that your customers might have, and capture lead information from a prospect as well. So it doesn't have to be a one-way conveyance of information. It doesn't just have to be the chatbot sending information to the customer. The chatbot can also collect information from the customer. So if a customer has a question while they're considering buying one of your products or services, the chatbot can resolve those questions and then collect the necessary information to proceed the customer to the next stage of the buyer journey. It's also very important to note over here that what a chatbot is not is AI. We're talking about NLP today, which is a subset of AI, but what a lot of people think is that chatbots automatically mean AI. Just keep it in your mind for now. We'll get into this a little more later, but chatbots don't necessarily have to be AI. We're going to discuss this in the next section, but I figured that we should mention it right now because whenever you mention chatbots, people automatically think AI. You can have AI chatbots, but a chatbot doesn't need AI to be a chatbot. There are a lot of great chatbots out there that don't have AI, and there are a lot of folks in the chatbot world who don't agree with me. They think that those are glorified. I think they think they're glorified forms essentially, but they look and feel like chatbots. They behave like chatbots. Customers perceive them as chatbots, but they don't really use any AI. A great example of this is the Lemonade intake chatbot, if you guys haven't seen that yet. But the beauty of chatbots is that they sit in between the text-based and human-based systems on this spectrum over here. They're engaging just like a conversation with a human being because they obviously mimic a human conversation. As you can see on the side, it's structured as a chat, so it feels like you're actually having a live chat, or it feels like you're having a conversation with someone or something on the other end. They can explain complex concepts just like a human being can through the power of branching. So essentially what branching is based on what the user tells you, you can show them a different set of information. Text-based systems usually cannot do that. So when you're looking at FAQ pages, when you're looking at help docs, you land on a page, the help doc sort of just spits out all of the information that it thinks you need, and then you have to parse through it to figure out what's important to you. With the chatbot, you don't face that issue. It's not unengaging in that way. They can explain these complex concepts in a way that a human being would, which is to say, oh, it can diagnose your problem first. It can ask you the specific parameters of your query, and then based on that, send you a custom set of information. And finally, they're cheap. So while they have all of these advantages that you normally associate with human agents, A chatbot is at the end of the day a piece of software. So the setup cost, the setup cost, the hosting, things like that, they're very similar to setting up a text-based system. A chatbot is essentially, you can think of it as a web page that just looks and feels like a chat conversation. And when you think about it in that context, they are quite cheap. Another byproduct of them being pieces of software is that they're always available. So chatbots don't have to sleep. They don't have to. They don't take vacation. They're available 24/7, 365 days in the year. But of course, we're not just talking about chatbots today. And as I established earlier, a chatbot doesn't need AI to function. What we are talking about today is NLP chatbots. So now that we've established how chatbots can help you address customer support queries, we need to add a complication to this story. We need to make the story. We need to flesh the story out a little bit, and we need to talk about why NLP chatbots in particular work and what NLP chatbots are. And a good starting point, of course, as always, is to define what we are talking about. So NLP is obviously an acronym. And it stands for natural language processing. If I'm sure you guys are already aware of that, but essentially what NLP does, what natural language processing means, is an NLP engine is a piece of software that, one, understands user input as text, and two, it can generate text to understand, to send back to the user. You can divide NLP up essentially into natural language understanding, or NLU, or natural language generation, which is NLG. But the broad umbrella term is NLP. And in the context of this webinar in particular, and in the context of chatbots in general, what most people talk about is this first point over here. They're talking about understanding user input text. They're talking about natural language understanding. So that's what we're going to focus on in this webinar. Now, like I mentioned earlier, when people think of chatbots, their first assumption is, don't all chatbots need NLP to function? I mean, isn't NLP sort of inherent in chatbots? When you're talking about NLP, you're talking about chatbots. When you're talking about chatbots, you're talking about NLP. They're the same thing, aren't they? Well, that's actually not the case. A chatbot doesn't necessarily need NLP to function. You can have NLP chatbots, but a chatbot doesn't need NLP to be a chatbot. And a good way to think about this is you can divide chatbot conversations up into closed-ended conversations and open-ended conversations. The difference between these two approaches to conversations is that in closed-ended conversations, the goal of the conversation is narrow. You have a very specific goal in mind that you are helping the user achieve. So for example, if you are trying to collect details from a user to help them apply for insurance, you have a very specific set of details that you need to collect to get them from not having insurance to having applied for insurance. And in that situation, your chatbot is in complete control of the conversation. You decide what questions are going to be asked. You decide what direction the conversation is going to go, not the user. And a byproduct of that is that the user input is structured. You ask for email, you ask for their name, you ask for their address. You are deciding how that input can be structured. An address is a very structured piece of information. An email ID is a very structured piece of information. Even your name, even though people have unique names, names in a lot of ways are structured pieces of information. So in cases, in closed-ended cases where you have a very narrow objective in mind, the user input is structured. In open-ended conversations, we're talking about the complete opposite. The goal of the conversation is broad. The chatbot doesn't necessarily have a particular goal in mind when it's entering the conversation. Rather, it's letting the user direct where the conversation is going to go. And based on what the user says, the chatbot will try to catch up to the user. And the end result of this approach to chatbot conversations is that the user input is unstructured, unlike in closed-ended conversations. So think about it this way, right? In a closed-ended conversation, something a chatbot might say is, hi, I'm going to help you apply for insurance. I need a few details to help you get started. First, can you give me your name? This is the chatbot controlling the conversation. It's structuring the user input. You have to give your name right now. It's not like you can ask for anything else at that moment. If you try, the chatbot will be like, sorry, I can't answer that. I need your name to help you finish this process. It moves on to the next question after you sharing your name and says, I need your email ID. Again, another structured piece of information. It's controlling the direction of the conversation. With an open-ended conversation, on the other hand, you can think of it as you land in the chatbot and the chatbot says, how can I help you? And there's an open text field that you can fill out as a customer, and you can say, the example we're going to take a look at later today, a couple of examples that we're going to take a look at later today. One is IT support. You can say, I need help setting up my email, my Outlook. And the chatbot needs to figure out what you mean by that. It needs to use the NLU, natural language understanding, part of its functionality to understand that, and then respond to make sense of your unstructured information, and then respond to that. And as you might have gathered from my description of these two types of conversations that you can have in a chatbot, what we are really talking about when we're talking about NLP chatbots is open-ended conversations. And a lot of customer support conversations are structured as open-ended conversations. Even in the examples that I gave, the closed-ended conversation was actually a lead generation conversation where the chatbot was collecting information from customers. And for lead generation conversations, often it makes sense to have closed-ended conversations because the data is anyways very structured. So it doesn't make sense to structure it as an open-ended conversation where you could bring in error. With customer support conversations, on the other hand, it is very user driven. You can't answer a user's question by predicting what that question is. You need to get the user to direct the conversation in the direction that they want. And their queries are always going to be different, or in some situations going to be different. You'd be surprised at how repetitive user queries are. And we'll get into that in a couple of slides over here. But you need the user to direct the conversation. And often the way the user needs to direct that conversation in a customer support context is in an unstructured manner. They need to type out their problem as they are facing it, or their question as they frame it in their minds. And where NLP comes into this picture, as I mentioned earlier, is in this unstructured part of the open-ended conversations. The role of NLP in open-ended conversations is to help you make sense of unstructured user input and respond to it appropriately. So you say, how can I help you in the context of a chatbot? Now, you need to use NLP to understand what that unstructured input was, and then accordingly respond to it in your chatbot. So that's where NLP comes into the picture. And with that, I think we have a pretty good understanding about what NLP is, how it figures into a customer support context, how it figures into customer support chatbots. And we can take a look at how it actually works in practice. First, what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at what the overall structure is. Then we'll actually go into an example where we can see what the actual steps look like, and we can even see a live deployment if we have time at the end. I think I've budgeted for it, and we seem to be doing pretty good on time. We're only 22 minutes into our session, and we're already onto, I think, the fourth section now. So the tools that you will need going into making an NLP chatbot, at least on the TARS platform, is you'll need TARS, obviously. TARS is sort of the front end of your chatbot. It's where you define your conversational flow. But the second thing that you will need is you will need an NLP engine. You'll need an NLP software that you can send user data to, and then use to understand what the user is saying, understand the intent of the user, and then accordingly branch your conversation off in different directions in TARS. And the overall structure is that the user sends the chatbot a query. The chatbot sends that message to Dialogflow. So in this case, we're talking about Dialogflow. That's the NLP engine we're going to be using. The chatbot sends that message to Dialogflow. Dialogflow understands what the user's intent is in that message, what the user is trying to achieve. It sends the result back to the bot. It says, oh, I think that the user's intent is this. It's email setup, it's printer setup in the example that I was giving earlier, or they're trying to pay their parking ticket, or they're trying to learn a little bit more about your pricing. That's their intent. Their intent is pricing. The chatbot uses that intent to branch the user off in different directions based on that intent. So the chatbot will now decide which branch in the chatbot workflow it is going to go down to address the user's specific intent. That's the overall structure. Now, in terms of actual implementation, there are quite a few steps. And over here, I'm actually going to switch back and forth between my slides and some actual examples of where you can see this. I'm also realizing that I didn't change the title on this slide because I imported it from another slide. So ignore the WhatsApp marketing part of this slide. If you don't have an issue with your webinar, did the webinar really happen? But broadly speaking, there are 5 steps to get started with your NLP chatbot in customer support automation. The first is to gather user input data. Now, the key thing to understand about creating an NLP chatbot is you can't just create an NLP chatbot out of nowhere. To create an NLP engine that understands user intent, you need to give it training data. And essentially what that means is you need to give it a set of examples of things that users might say, and then you need to tell Dialogflow or whatever NLP engine you're using what the intent in each of those phrases are. Now, what Dialogflow or your whatever your NLP engine is going to do is it's going to look at those phrases, it's going to look at the intents that you give it, and it's going to say, okay, I'm going to try and figure out some patterns between these, and then based on what users send me, based on what TARS sends me, I'm going to use what I've learned from this, what I've learned from this sample data that I've got, this training data that I've got, to make sense of any new input that the user gives me. Now, the first step to do that training is you need to gather the user input data. So a good starting point for this is if you already have a live chat system, if you already are accepting queries from people over email, go through your live chat transcripts, go through your emails, and figure out how users are responding to the question that your chatbot is asking. So if your chatbot is starting off by saying, how can I help you today? In the context of live chat, in the context of your phone conversations, in the context of your email, how are people responding to that question when you say, how can I help you? What phrases are they using to respond to those questions? And note those phrases down in a Google Sheet. And we're actually going to jump into the Google Sheet that's screenshotted here in just a second. Now, once you have all of those phrases noted down in your Google Sheet, what you can do is you can decide what the intent is. You can group that data by its intent. So over here, we have several phrases, and we've grouped it into two different intents. The first set of phrases over here, their intent is email setup. They want to set the person who sends any of these messages. It's clear that they want to set up their email. So we map all of these disparate phrases to email setup. We map the intent as email setup. And similarly, for the latter half of these phrases, we map them to printer setup because that's what they want to do. They want to set up their printer. And we can actually take a look at what this sheet looks like in person, because I actually have the sheet open over here. So this is the sheet that we're talking about. You don't actually have to be clear. We'll go to step 3 in just a second. You can go directly to step 3. I just find that structuring my information in a sheet beforehand helps me stay on top of the whole process, especially when you're starting out. I find that it's a much easier way to get started because we're all familiar with using sheets. And there's a much lower barrier to entry to start using sheets and then move over to something like Dialogflow to actually put the data into. So you set it up a sheet kind of like this. You have all of the phrases that you've collected from your live chat, from your emails, and you tag each one of those phrases with a set of a set of intents. One way to think about this is that all of these phrases over here, every single one of these phrases over here, is a different way of saying, can you help me set up my email? And similarly, all of these phrases over here are different ways of saying, can you help me set up my printer? Now let's get back to the slides. We're going to jump back in, jump back out quite a bit in the next few slides. Now, once you have all of that set up, what you want to do is you want to take that information and you want to map it out into Dialogflow or whatever your NLP engine is. Now, there are two types of Dialogflow available on the market now. There are, it used to just be one Dialogflow, but now there's actually two. There's Dialogflow ES, which is Dialogflow Enterprise, I think. And then there's Dialogflow CX, which is what is their main product. That's what enterprises use to create complex flows. And there's Dialogflow ES, which is Dialogflow Essentials, which is for smaller projects. Now, in this webinar, we're going to be talking about Dialogflow ES, Dialogflow Essentials, because I think it's an easier starting point. And when we're talking about using Dialogflow with your TARS chatbot, you don't really need all of the functionality the Dialogflow CX provides. But that's a really quick aside, because when you go off into the world and try to build your conversational engines, when you try to build your training sets and try to input it into Dialogflow, you're going to be given that option, and I just want you guys to be to know which one to select. So I'd say that start off with Dialogflow ES. That's where we're going to be taking a look at right now. Now, what it looks like to actually put this data that you have gathered in your sheet into Dialogflow Essentials is you have a section where you can define your intents. And what you want to do is you want to create those intents. So over here, we identified two intents in our data. There's email setup and there's printer setup. Now, what we did was we created two intents by clicking the Create Intent button at the top. And when we create an intent and we name it email setup or printer setup, if we jump into one of these intents, essentially what we are doing is we are telling Dialogflow what all of the phrases that mean email setup are. So whenever someone says phrases that are similar to this set of phrases over here, we can assume that their intent is email setup. And all we did was we took the phrases that we had in this sheet and we put them into the phrases that we have in Dialogflow. I can give you another example and put it in over here. We can say, I want to set up my Outlook email. Now we've added that as a training phrase over here, in Dialogflow is going to look at that phrase and it's going to incorporate it into the patterns that it calculates to figure out whether someone's asking about email or not. Now, once we have all of this, this setup in Dialogflow, the next thing that you want to do is you want to build out your conversational flow based on what we want to do is we want to build out our conversational flow in the TARS builder. So we've got a whole setup over here in Dialogflow as of right now, where we are at, where Dialogflow is able to understand what user intent is based on a message that we send to the user based on a message that we send to the user from TARS, which we're going to do through an API call. But we have this intent matching engine set up, but that's only part of the picture, right? Because once we figure out what a user's intent is, we need to be able to actually deliver a service to them or deliver information to them based on that intent that we detect. And to do that, what we want to do is we want to build out our conversational flow. And what that essentially looks like is taking those intents that we identified. So over here, email setup and printer setup, and then using those intents that we identified to map out our business processes. So if someone asks for email setup, what are the steps that we are going to guide them through in the chat flow? What are the questions we're going to ask them? What are the pieces of information that we're going to present to them to set up email? Because, for example, if they ask to set up email, we need to say, oh, are you setting it up on your Android phone? Are you setting it up on your iPhone? Are you setting it up on your Windows device? Is it a desktop, mobile phone, et cetera, and then present them the right set of instructions in the chat flow, right? So we need to build out all of that logic into our conversational flow. And over here, I actually have that set up. This looks a lot more complex than it is. I just have a tendency to overcomplicate my chatbot flow. So over here, what's essentially happening is we capture a user utterance over here. We send that to Dialogflow where the intent is detected. And then based on the intent, we branch off in different directions. Now, these are actually just two intents, printer setup and email setup. But the reason I have over here 1, 2, 3, 7 branches is because I've created separate branches for if someone says email intent and their device is an iPhone, let's take them to the iPhone setup. If their intent is email setup, and their device is an Android, let's send them in the direction of the Android instructions, et cetera, et cetera. But essentially, this is just a glorified flow chart where we've mapped out the flows behind each intent. And we've put it into our chatbot builder. Now, once we have that set up, once we have the flows set up in our TARS builder, the next thing that you want to do is the last step really is you want to link your TARS and Dialogflow together. So the way that looks, wow, it's great. It went directly to the end product is through an API config. So over here, what we have is we have a setup over here where Dialogflow is linked to our API config. And what I'll do is this is moderately technical process. You just need to put the right URL over here, the right details. I can't really show you what our authentication details are because then we'd have to get those changed. But what we'll do is when we're sending out this recording, we'll add a help doc to walk you through that process rather than reinventing the wheel, because we do have a help doc with a video that actually explains that. So what you do is you link it up through a regular API config. If you've set up Zapier in your chatbots before, if you've set up things like Zapier, if you've set up things like SendGrid, it's a very similar process. And once you have those linked together, that's pretty much it. You have the entire entire process set up. Your tars and your dialog flow are linked, and your chatbot is ready to go. So over here, this is the chatbot that we were just taking a look at on the back end, where we had these training phrases of email setup and printer setup. It's a demo that we created for Montana State University for a conference. They didn't end up using it, but it's still a great demo, and it still gets across what we're trying to achieve with customer support automation. The other thing that I love about using IT support as an example, even though most businesses won't use this when they're talking to their customers, is it's very relatable to everyone. I think everyone has worked at an organization, been in an organization where you want to set up, where you have a whole process of setting up email and a whole process of setting up your printer drivers. Pretty much any college really does this. And I presume most of us have been to college for at least a couple of years. So over here, we have our final product. We've linked our chatbot to Dialogflow. It is able to detect user intent. So let's give it a go. Let's give it a spin. Let's say I want to set up email on my phone. I see that you're currently on a desktop. Okay, so over here, this is an issue in the way I set it up, but it was able to detect over here that we are trying to set up, we're trying to set up email. It incorrectly assumed though, because I'm on a desktop, that we are on that we want to set up email on our desktop. It did not gather the my phone part, and that's because this is a key point to note. That's because we did not incorporate that into our training model. Over here, if you look at these messages, we haven't told Dialogflow anything about the user's intent as it pertains to their device. We've just told Dialogflow that messages like this map out to email intent, and then in our conversation, we've said if they have email intent, detect what their device is, and then asked if they want to set up email on that device. We haven't made a check. We haven't tried to detect intent based on device. We've just done it based on email. This is actually a great point that you have to note when you go into setting up an NLP engine. There are going to be errors. The reason a lot of folks, the reason NLP isn't as big a deal as it is, as people make it out to be today, is because when you set up NLP chatbots, there are inevitably going to be errors. And really it boils down to how you handle those errors and how you address those errors in the future. That's going to define the success of your chatbot. And also another point to note, you can, once you've set up your training set, you can feel like you've accounted for every single possible outcome out there. And the minute you hand it to a person, even if that person is yourself, you'll find an error in it immediately. So let's actually refresh the page and see what it looks like when it actually works. So let's just remove the on my phone from that phrase. This is obviously not how it would work in real life. If I was an actual person, I'd be like, no, I said my phone. I get a little frustrated. And that's the risk that you face with using NLP. It's only going to be as good as you train your engine. So I need help setting up email. I see that you're currently on desktop. Would you like email setup? So over here, this is a better flow. This would frustrate the user a lot less. They say, I need help setting up email. The user is, the chatbot understood that they're trying to do email setup and is being proactive and saying, I see you're on desktop. It was able to discover that we were on desktop in our, through the TARS builder. The TARS builder can actually do this. And then based on that is prompting us to go ahead with the email set up on desktop. But say that I want to set it up on my phone, I can say, no, I'm setting up on a different device. This is the flow that we built out in the TARS builder, all of the complex gambits over here. That's what we're going through right now. We're going to say no. I want to set it up on my mobile or tablet, decide our operating system, and then it takes us forward from there. But that's what the end product looks like. And this was actually a demo, but we actually do have a live example to show you guys as well. So this is the city of Tyler. I always love using government agencies as examples. Because if a government agency can address its customer support issues using a piece of technology, then your business definitely can. Because I mean, governments, they get possibly the most frustrated set of customers on the internet who have, in a lot of ways, the most diverse set of questions, because I mean, the services that governments offer are quite varied. So this is the city of Tyler. They have a chatbot deployed on their website that tries to understand user input, and based on unstructured user input, tries to direct people in the correct place. So what's something that we can ask the city of Tyler? Oh, I know. This is actually something I had to do recently with the city of LA, but I want to pay my parking ticket. Let's see how this chatbot handles it. I think you're looking to pay a traffic ticket. Okay, there we go. What this chatbot did was it took my message, sent the message to an NLP engine to figure out what I was trying to say. It detected that my intent was to pay a traffic ticket, and is now just confirming that with me. So I can say yes. Now, when I say yes, what Tyler, Texas can actually do on the back end is it can look through all of the conversations this chatbot has had and use my conversation to improve the training set on its engine. So it can take the phrase that I said, I want to pay my traffic ticket, put that into its dialogue flow, put that into its NLP engine, and then use that to improve the phrases that improve the phrases that the chatbot is using to figure out what people are asking for. And now we're in the right place to pay off our tickets at the city of Tyler. We can put in our citation number, look it up, and get to where we need to go. Now, if you think about how we would have done that if the chatbot wasn't there and we couldn't just ask the chatbot what we wanted to do, we'd have to go through all of these menus over here, figure out where exactly we'd want to go through. Pay a traffic ticket is actually here. Check it out. But we'd have to read through all of these other options instead of just being able to say, I want to pay my traffic ticket. I mean, like when I'm skimming over this right now, I don't immediately see where pay my traffic ticket is. And if I miss it, maybe I'll scroll through the website and see. There we go, pay traffic ticket. And then it would take me to the thing, to the appropriate page. But with a chatbot, it's sort of, you can think of it as sort of an escape hatch where I don't have to read through anything. I can just direct I can direct the conversation in whatever direction I want. I can direct the interaction in whatever direction that I want. But that's pretty much it in terms of how NLP chatbots work. And I think we can just move on to the Q&A section of this webinar. But before I do, if you guys have any questions for us, feel free to reach out to us through these methods. This is for the folks who have to leave right now. If you have any questions after the fact, reach out to us through any of these options over here. You can reach out to me personally by email, or you can go to our website and book a demo with us over there. But for now, we are going to take some questions from you guys. I'd love to hear if you guys have any questions. I see that we already have one. Can TARs use webhooks? Great question. So I presume what you're asking is, can TARs pull data from a webhook? TARs is a pretty versatile API integration feature. So without going into the actual API call that we're making over here, without going into the API call we're making over here so that I don't reveal our authorization codes, what I'll do is I'll create another Gambit over here. And from this dropdown at the top, I'm going to select API config. Now, essentially what this allows you to do is it allows you to make, it pulls up an API configuration where you can make an API call, to any API endpoint out there in the middle of your conversation. So the way it works is, if you think about this gambit as having an entry point and an exit point, where say we detect the user's intent, and based on the user's intent, we branch them into this gambit. That's how they enter this gambit. Now, once they enter from the top, what's the first thing that we're going to do in this gambit? The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make this API call. So if you have a webhook where you have data that you want the chatbot to pull in, what you can do is you can make the API call over here. But once it makes the API call, once it gets a response, it's going to move on. And if you want to check that webhook again, and you want to pull more data in, you're going to have to make another API call after this gambit is complete, to pull that fresh data from the webhook. Now, theoretically, what you could do is every single stage of it would make your conversation a little bit slower, but at every single stage of the conversation, at every single step of the conversation, you could make an API call to check if there's new data for you to pull at the webhook. But that's a great question. Thanks, Pierre. Any more questions? I anticipate that you guys we have a question in the chat, I believe. You can book a demo with us here. Great catch, Abhilash. Great catch. You can book a demo with us there. And I highly recommend that you guys do, because essentially what we do in the demo is we give you a personalized webinar where we talk about a lot of the same, same stuff, but customized to your specific needs. We have a true or false question here. I feel like I'm back in high school and I'm giving a test. For a lead generation or marketing use case, objective close-ended flows always work better, true or false? Okay, look, in most cases, I'd say that for a lead generation use case, a closed-ended flow would probably make more sense, because the data that you're collecting is very structured. It doesn't really make sense to keep everything open-ended and unstructured. An example of this, again, is the Lemonade intake chatbot. So Lemonade, for those of you who aren't familiar, is an insurance company. It's a newer insurance company, and they provide renters insurance. So even I have renters insurance through Lemonade. And when you're signing up for Lemonade, when you're applying for the renters insurance, you go through a conversation with their chatbot, their AI-powered insurance agent. I think her name is Maya, and the conversation with Maya it's essentially a glorified form. It feels like magic. Honestly, it feels better than any other onboarding experience to any other insurance, getting a quote experience from any other insurance company out there. It's structured as a chat conversation, but if you look at the information that you're submitting at each stage, it's very structured. A great example of this is, they ask you a question, do you have roommates, which they need to calculate what your quote is going to be. Now, you could leave that unstructured. You could make it an open-ended conversation and give users the opportunity to type yes or no. But even from a user experience perspective, doesn't really make sense. You can just give them a yes and no button over there. Now, it kind of breaks from the chat conversation, what we normally expect from a chat conversation. But I'd say that the overall look and feel of the interface is still a chat conversation. You're just reducing the friction a little bit. This is an example of where it really doesn't make sense to have an open-ended conversation compared to a closed-ended conversation. And overall, I would say in most lead generation or marketing use cases, it makes more sense to have a closed-ended conversational flow than an open-ended conversational flow. But I can see there being exceptions out there. So a great example of this is, say you are a law firm and you are trying to collect lead information about how you're trying to collect lead information from your customers about their case. You're trying to help them book a consultation. Now, a personal injury lawyer, for example, might deal with different types of injuries, and they need a different set of details to service people with who have different types of injuries. You might have gotten into a car accident, you might have gotten into a motorcycle accident, or you might have been scratched by someone's cat. Different set of information required for each of those types of information. Now, what you could do is you could just have a set of options that people can select from as buttons to say, this is the sort of injury that I have. Or what you could do is you could keep an open-ended question where you could just give the user the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what happened to them and why they're reaching out to you. And then what you can do is you can, based on what the user submits in that context, you can detect what their intent is, what type of injury they have, and then accordingly branch them off into different directions to ask them a different set of qualification questions. So I'd say mostly true. To the short answer to your question, for lead generation marketing use cases, closed-ended flows always work better. Mostly true. Just because you've used the word always over here, I'm going to say false, because there are some situations in which you might want to use elements of an open-ended conversation in the flow. But I'd say in most situations, it's probably true. Any more questions? Also, we have a bunch of webinars lined up for May. You can check them out over here. Great catch again, Avilash. People feel free to sign up for our other webinars as well. If you enjoyed what you heard and what you saw today, please, I highly recommend that you sign up for those webinars as well. It helps us because then when we go to our marketing catch-ups, we can say, oh, we got these many signups, and we can feel happy about ourselves. I'm also looking at the previous messages that we have over here. Pierre commiserating me on my bad coffee. It is really quite bad, this coffee. I made it in a rush, literally 5 minutes before this webinar. And I must have gotten the ratios of coffee and water wrong, but it is very bitter. But it gets the job done. It has caffeine in it, and that's really what's important. So I think we should be good. At the end of the day, that's why I drink coffee, for the caffeine. So it doesn't look like we have any more questions over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end the webinar here. Thank you guys for joining us. As always, you guys have been a great audience. I hope you guys got value out of this webinar. If you need help implementing any of this and you're already a TARS customer, just reach out to your customer success manager. Honestly, when I'm preparing for these webinars, thanks, Pierre. I appreciate the feedback. But when I'm preparing for these webinars, I speak to our customer success managers usually to get their sense of what I should talk about, because they are the ones who are actually in the trenches implementing things like this for customers. And they could really, if you need help implementing something like this, you could reach out to your customer success manager to get help from them. And if you haven't signed up for the TARS Builder yet, you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, when you do sign up for the TARS Builder, when you do become a subscriber with us, one of members of our customer success team will help you achieve success through your chatbot. And what that looks like is essentially helping you implement awesome, if slightly scary, things like NLP into your chatbot, or helping you implement more complex flows using the TARS Builder. But yeah, just something to keep in mind. But that's it from me today. Thank you guys for joining us. I'm going to end the session there. We will upload this webinar shortly after it is done. We just need to wait for it to process. And then we will send out a recording to you guys. Thank you guys for joining us, and have a great day.